So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the naming of ionic and covalent bonds based on the IUPAC, or International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. Before we can start talking about how to name bonds, we first have to talk about how bonds form. And they usually form because there's a balance of charges between different elements, and they bond into molecules. And this is seen in this picture when you look at lithium and oxygen, and they do a crisscross where the exponent or charge of the element is crisscrossed to get the subscript for the other element when you're actually writing the formula. So in this case, lithium has a 1 plus charge, and oxygen ends up with a 1 subscript, although you don't notice it because you don't need to put a 1 subscript, because if you leave it alone, it's just like an exponent of 1. It goes to 0 because you don't need to put it. And the same thing with O2 minus, gets crisscrossed and it forms lithium with a subscript of 2. Okay, why do you do this charge crisscross thing? First off, when you do it, you end up with lithium. You need 2 lithium atoms instead of 1, and when you get 2 times the amount of charge, so it's 2 times a positive 1 charge, it equals positive 2 charge. And for oxygen, you only need 1 oxygen atom, and it had a 2 minus charge, so it's just 1 times 2 minus equals 2 minus. And then when the total amount of charges together equals 0, and that's what you want for a stable molecular thing. We'll talk about later about polyatomic ions that don't exactly have a stable charge and still need to be bonded to other things. Another important thing you have to realize is that when you do the crisscross, you could have subscripts that have like big numbers, and you try to simplify it to its next whole number if you can divide every single element by that number. So in this case, you can divide the 2 can be divided by 2, the 4 can be divided by 2, and you're left with a subscript of 1 and a subscript of 2. We're going to be talking about how do you name covalent bonds. In this case, we're going to be using SO3. First step is to add a numerical prefix with the amount of subscripts that follow the atomic symbol. In this case, sulfur will turn into monosulfur because it has 1 subscript, and oxygen will turn into trioxygen because it has 3 subscripts. The step is that you don't start the name of the first element with mono if it only has 1. So in that case, it only turn into sulfur trioxygen. And then another thing to know is that the first element is capitalized, yet the second, everything that comes after is not capitalized. The third step is you replace the end of the second element with "ide." And so in this case, the final name would be sulfur trioxide. Now we're going to do an example for naming an ionic compound. In this case, we're going to be trying to name Fe2O3. First step is to just write the name in the metal. In this case, Fe meaning is iron, so you just write iron. Now the second step is you look if the metal is a transition metal. If it is, you look at the charge that metal had. In this case, the best way to do it is to do a reverse crisscross, where you look back at the subscript of the nonmetal. In this case, it's a 3 for oxygen, O3. So that means it would have a 3 plus charge. And you write that in a Roman numeral to the right of the metal. So in this case, it's iron 3. Now the final step, step 3, is that you look at the nonmetal and write it after step 2. And in this case, it would be oxygen, but then you change the last part of it to "ide." So in this case, Fe2O3 would be iron 3 oxide.